By the middle of the 18th century, almost every farm, smallholding and cottage had its loom shop. It was here that traditional Blackburn cloth made from wool and linen was produced, but by this time cotton was of paramount importance. These old houses are typical of those used in the domestic system of industrial production. In those days, before the mechanization that came with the Industrial Revolution, work was carried out in people's homes. These cottages were once hand-loom weavers' houses. They had their large wooden looms at home, and they spent hours weaving, producing what were known as cuts of cloth. The construction of cottages such as these indicate that they were used for domestic weaving. Windows face in the direction of most sun, and they're larger than was often the case in the past, when glass was expensive and difficult to make into clear, flat panes. Today, these houses still make fine homes. Blackburn was ideally suited for the development of the cotton industry. The hill streams could provide water power for early machinery, and there was an abundance of cheap, experienced labour. The coming of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal in the early 19th century made it easier to transport the raw materials of cotton and coal. And later, its mills were built along canal banks. Water was drawn from the canal for the many steam engines that were necessary to drive Blackburn's mills. Almost everyone knows that the spinning jenny was invented in 1766 in Stanhill, near Blackburn, by James Hargreaves. The first spinning jenny that Hargreaves constructed consisted of 8 spindles, which he set up in a room in his house. By means of this machine, he was able to do so much work that he could dispense with several of the spinners that he employed. They had spun only on 1 spindle each. James didn't want his invention made public, and he only made the machine for his own family to use. This machine was one of the most important textile inventions of all time, but not everyone was happy with it. Some of the local workpeople were very hostile to the spinning jenny, and they attacked James' house. Hargreaves' invention revolutionized the spinning sector of the cotton industry, but the role of his native town in the conversion of the weaving sector from a domestic to a factory-based industry is not generally realized. A series of Blackburn inventors perfected the loom, so much so that it became known as the Blackburn loom. One of these inventors was John Osbouldeston, who made a device for stopping the loom safely. He died in poverty, claiming that his invention had been pirated by men who went on and made fortunes for themselves. John lies here at Tockholes churchyard, and sadly John is now largely forgotten. Eventually, Blackburn became the most important cotton weaving town in the world. It produced more cloth by volume than anywhere else, including its rival Burnley, which claimed to produce a greater length. Parts of the town were dominated by vast mills. Some of these have survived, converted for other uses as the cotton industry has declined. One of these is Imperial Mill, which was at one time Blackburn's biggest spinning mill. In its latter days it was owned by Courtaulds, but it closed down in 1980. The mill is still a huge and magnificent building. The Lancashire Saw Company uses part of it now. Nova Scotia Mill is another former mill which is now R.L. Jepson's furniture store.
I first started working in the cotton industry at about 1950. I worked at for the Vale Manufacturing Company, Hastonley Mill, which was off Emerald Street, off Old New Road in Blackburn. The conditions in the mill in the 1950s were rather poor. From a worker's point of view, from a management point of view, they weren't really bothered what they were like. But conditions were bad in this respect. It was very, very hot in summer, even though they used to whitewash the north lights of the shed for 3 weeks. Blackburn Holiday Week, they used to have dollopers come in and whitewash the shed roof. So that used to cut the glare down. But they were very hot. And of course there was no ventilation for a start off. There were flag floors which were very hard to walk on or stand on, and it was exceptionally noisy. You imagine 400 looms, and they're each picking across, say, 150, 200 picks a minute, and every time it picks across it goes clack, then it picks back and it goes clack. So imagine, you multiply that by 400 looms, 200 times a minute. It is exceptionally noisy. I don't know how many decibels, but I will think probably on the threshold of pain, really. And of course you couldn't talk in the mill because it was too noisy. You had to memo, what they call memoing, in other words lip reading, which they all were experts at. Well, the kissing of shuttles went out about 1948, so when I worked in the mill, you didn't kiss the shuttle, but the idea was, you'll see these old photographs of somebody lifting a shuttle to the lips, and they call it kissing the shuttle, but they were sucking the weft through. They weren't kissing it, they were touching it with the lips and sucking, and that brought the weft through, or the thread through if you want, and that threaded the shuttle so you could put in the loom and away you went. But that was very unhygienic. It was all black round the eye where you sucked it in. It was a bit horrible, really. So I don't think anybody got really. I never heard of anybody getting any horrible infection off them. I think everybody was very immune to things then, you know. The toilets in the mill, of course, they were built when the mill was built in 1910. And of course, in those days, they were like servants' toilets, if you will. Like you go to these stately homes, and the workers' toilets were absolutely disgustingly horrible. They were the old marbles, so it was like the Lord of the Manor had. This was the same idea, and they were in two sort of brick-built sheds on a slope opposite the mill office in the yard. And the men's were sort of north, and the women's were south, but they were joined up. But the toilets were just seats over a trough that had running water in it, and of course it was on a slope. And the men used to light newspapers when they were women and send it down to burn their houses. It's rather comical, I thought.
Many of Blackburn's great cotton mills are just a fading memory. How many of you remember these mills? Albert Mill, Bank Mill Cherry Tree, Cicely Bridge Mill, Ewood Mill,